Thank Thank you so much for everyone joining us. It is one of those cold days, so I'm very glad that we could do this and huddle up in this virtual room together to share some of this information. So I'm very honored and excited to share this with you. Before we start, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. I am speaking from Calgary, and the organization that I work for is CARIA. So CARIA engages with Calgarians, with families, older adults as well, who are in need of some form of various forms of support, but also empowerment tools. Calgary is on the traditional unceded territory of the land called Mohkintas, where the Bow and the Elbow rivers flow together. We acknowledge the authentic history and oral traditions of the Treaty 7 nations, Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis, and the Otipemisiwak, District 5 and 6. And out of respect of reciprocity and reconciliation, we acknowledge that we are visitors, guests, and immigrants on their land. And CARIA works together to support individuals and families and communities to live together as one. And we honor all peoples who share this sacred land as well. So I appreciate you all being here with us, and I appreciate being able to be on this land and share the abundance of this land as well. So the topic that we're going to talk about and what I wanted to share with you today in terms of information, I guess, is this whole idea of healthy relationships as we grow older. One of the things that I'm assuming that you may have known about me, I guess, or the work that I do, is I work with ethnocultural communities that speak languages and come from cultures that are not mainstream or English speaking. So we call them ethnocultural communities who are linguistically and culturally diverse. What I also do is I work around the topic of elder abuse as well. When I do approach these communities to share our resources and knowledge and educate around elder abuse, I actually don't talk to them about elder abuse. I talk to them about healthy relationships as we grow older, and how might a relationship turn out to be if it were to become unhealthy, and the factors that we need to pay attention to as communities about unhealthy relationships. Only then, when I come from this angle, of course, are communities more open to talking about elder abuse, because it's a stigma of a topic and it's shrouded by silence in some communities. It's very important for us to be mindful of the ways that we approach these communities, the way that we use words, the way that we have words on our posters or flyers, and the information that we share with them. Words have power. And what I find sometimes working with communities is we just really need to sometimes shift the language that we use in order for it to become more welcoming and more empowering. So rather than going in and talking about elder abuse, I would say to them, I'm coming to talk to you about healthy relationships as we grow older, and the signs to look out for relationships if they become unhealthy, and what to do about it. Another example that I'd like to give you is if I'm talking to them about mental illness, for example, or mental health challenges, I go in talking about mental well-being and holistic well-being, and how we can promote and enhance our well-being, as opposed to going in talking about mental illness. So sometimes we really just need to change the ways that we're wording things, come from a strength-based approach, an empowering approach, as opposed to one that talks about deficits and things that are wrong with you. So what I found is when I talk to communities about healthy relationships as we grow older, they're more open to discussing some of the challenges and the concerns that they may have in their community, and they share it with me. But when you hear it as a professional, you know what they're talking about is what we call elder abuse. And so I think that's a really great way of being able to realize and understand that all communities experience elder abuse and older adult mistreatment, but the way they talk about it is different, and the way that we hear it and perceive it is different, and how they perceive it is different. And so sometimes there has to be that opportunity for shared conversations to be able to clarify what we perceive as elder abuse, what you perceive as elder abuse, and then find those commonalities in terms of supports. So a disclaimer that I wanted to share with you here is in addressing some of these sensitive topics, and this is a disclaimer I have to admit that I've started to share whenever I have these conversations, through experience, of course. And so that's why I find it important. So in addressing these sensitive topics of older adult mistreatment, our intention is not to generalize or perpetuate stereotypes about any particular culture or community. What we're aiming for, however, is to initiate a dialogue. And if we can't create environments in which we feel safe enough, valued and heard enough to be able to open up to these conversations and these topics, we will never have these conversations. I would rather for us to at least try and initiate and acknowledge that we may put our foot in our mouth every now and then, and we don't know everything, and we shouldn't know everything about cultures. Coming with that sense of acknowledgement, I think always is helpful. And I found that out also from my experience with working with ethnocultural communities. Admitting you don't know everything. So rather than coming from cultural competence, come from cultural humility, which is, I don't know everything about your culture. I would like to learn from you about your culture. And when you come in from that angle and that lens, I found that ethnoculture communities are far more open to accepting you as an individual who wants to learn from them, and as opposed to assuming that you know what is best for them. And so the aim here is to initiate an open, respectful conversation that recognizes the unique cultural nuances and dynamics. By understanding these cultural contexts, we can then provide informed and compassionate support to our older adults of all diverse backgrounds and communities. The goal of these conversations is to foster awareness, to encourage and champion cultural humility, and hopefully create a space like this where we feel collectively safe enough and empowered to explore how to better serve the people that we're serving and the communities that we're serving, and honoring them and their differences in terms of their values and traditions. So that is my disclaimer as well that I will share with you about talking about ethnocultural communities. Even though I talk about ethnocultural communities, I hope I don't come across as perpetuating a generalized stereotype. All communities and all individuals within these communities come with unique experiences and unique needs. However, we will also see some shared experiences and shared challenges that also need to be highlighted as well. And I think that's the beauty of these conversations, is that they also highlight that, in fact, there are things that we do have in common, even when it comes to our successes, but also our pain points as well, and our challenges too. This is a picture of myself and two of my closest friends who are 86 and 94. And this is just really to exemplify the importance of healthy relationships as we grow older. And combined, we have a combined age of more than 120 years. And so that's 120 years of experiences and 120 years of memories that we're creating together. And I think this picture in particular, which is one of my favorites, when I first introduced them to Starbucks and pumpkin spice lattes, and how they really enjoyed this and they look forward to it. So we do meet up almost every second weekend throughout the year. We continue to do that as best as we can, to just meet up for about an hour and talk about life and talk about experiences and really catch up on news. But this is an example of the importance of a healthy relationship as we grow older. These two women, in particular, for example, don't have family. One of them isn't married and doesn't have a family and children, and the other is a widow and her two adult children don't live in the city. And so they live in a retirement community. They're surrounded by people, but it's also important for them to be outside of that community and still continue to feel connected with our outside community and not necessarily be isolated as such. So the objectives of talking about healthy relationships here is to really define what they are and what an unhealthy relationship may look like, to understand the importance of culture and how culture plays a role in relationship dynamics, to be able to understand and be more aware of the nuances that sometimes are at play when it comes to older adult mistreatment in ethnocultural communities, but also to develop culturally respectful supports, ones that work for the community and ones that are actually based through conversation of the needs of those communities as well. And my main objective of our conversation today, hopefully, is to also empower you, to help you empower your team. We're all doing the best we can. We all come with great intention. We all want to do better with the resources and the challenges and limitations that we are coming across. And my hope is this conversation today will help you feel a little bit more equipped with some tools to approach these topics or help your teams approach them. So these are really the key takeaway points. I usually like to start with really summarizing the conversations that I have and the trainings that I have, because I don't sometimes get through all of my PowerPoints. And so I really want you to get the nuggets. The nuggets hopefully are that healthy relationships do promote well-being. Relationships are grounded in respect, dignity, and interdependence because we're social beings. And the care of community and that care that comes from that interdependence is actually essential for this physical and psychological and emotional well-being of all people, including older adults. We never stop wanting to have healthy relationships, regardless of how old we are, whether we're 20, 40, 70, or 100. The other takeaway is that people can come and will come with their strengths and capabilities. I hope that we continue to see individuals that we serve and work for from that strength-based lens. Working with ethnocultural communities, I have found that they do have strengths. They have coping mechanisms. They have capabilities. They are very innovative. They really had to sometimes think outside of the box when the necessity hit their experiences, or they came across these experiences. And so to look at that from that strength-based lens, what do you have, what do you bring with you to this conversation, and how can we build and support that to enhance your well-being or the well-being of your community? I hope is the lens that we take from this conversation as well, and ways that we can recognize and support and empower those skills and contribute in ways that are meaningful to these communities. The other thing that I really hope that we take away is community engagement and conversations. They are dually beneficial. They will benefit us as service providers, and they benefit community as well, because they feel heard and their experiences are honored and respected. And then we know what works for them when we have conversations with them, as opposed to assuming we know what works for them because it's a one-size-fits-all approach, which we know doesn't work. The other main point is that unhealthy relationships may look different to how you and I see it. The perception and the lens that we come from are impacted, are tainted by our education, by our upbringing, by our experience, by our bubbles that we surround ourselves with. And the same goes for community as well. How they perceive mistreatment or abuse is going to be different based on the cultural nuances that are at play, but also based on the language that they use as well. And so it's very important to keep that in mind. It's about them, it's not about us, and that's a trauma-informed lens. And it's also about them sharing with you how does, and that's usually, you'll see that in my presentation today. I'll ask you questions like, how do healthy relationships look like to you? Or how does abuse or mistreatment look like to you, for example? And when you ask those questions, you'll be able to get a better understanding of how it looks like to them from their lens and their perspective. A really important point, of course, is stigma and silence do require sensitivity and honoring of experiences in ways that work and are honorable to those communities. So elder abuse and older adult mistreatment are very sensitive and stigmatized topics, as well as mental illness, of course, and dementia, for example, as well. So when we know that there are some conversations and topics that are very sensitive, that maybe if we go guns a-blazing saying that we're talking about elder abuse, we might have reluctance and communities that say, we don't have elder abuse in our community because we honor our older adults. You and I know that elder abuse knows no race, ethnicity, culture, background, religion, socioeconomic, educational status. So it's very important to understand that elder abuse happens and can happen in any culture, in any community. But when you hear a community say, we don't have this particular experience or phenomena, it's important to understand, why do they think they don't have it? And what is it about this topic, or what is it about my approach or my organization's approach that might be preventing this community from feeling comfortable opening up to me? Or another question that I'd like us to ask ourselves is, do these communities know who we are? Have we built a relationship with them? Do they trust us? Have we built rapport? Have we done community outreach with these communities? Do we know who their cultural brokers are? Have we built a relationship with their community or ethnic leaders? And I think asking ourselves these questions prior to entering some of these communities will help immensely. Like I said, that conversation engagement will be duly beneficial in order to understand how we can better approach these communities when we know we have something to offer them, and we know that they are experiencing some of those challenges, that they might be a bit sensitive, they might be a bit sensitive and is shrouded by silence. And another main point that I really wanted to highlight as well is that your role matters. Your role is hugely important. It is very impactful. It is very much needed. These conversations that I have with ethnocultural communities, and I've had a lot throughout the year, are very well appreciated, and they want more. Ethnocultural communities are hungry for knowledge. They are hungry for empowerment. Sometimes they might not know who to approach or how to approach it, or they might not feel comfortable of the lack of cultural incompatibility cultural compatibility within some of those organizations. Maybe historically they've had negative experiences and traumatic experiences with authority and agencies. And so when we come from that lens of cultural humility and compassion and respecting and honoring their experiences, they are very welcoming, I have to say, and they are very appreciative and grateful for this education, and they want more. So your role is very important. And so that call to action right there at the end is, my hope is that we build culturally inclusive and compassionate programs to educate and empower our communities and our team and our members, and strengthen our relationships as a community in whole, as a society in whole, and promote the safety and dignity and well-being of all older adults in our communities, and in particular ones who are culturally and linguistically diverse as well. So I thought I'd share with you maybe just a little bit of an exercise here, and then hopefully, we can benefit from these conversations. And so please feel free to either use the mic or maybe answer in the chat if you want. These are some signs that I thought that I'd share with you some experiences and how we would know and spot the signs when it's healthy, when it's unhealthy, and when it's going towards the abusive spectrum, because it can be a spectrum. Research has found that individuals who are experiencing unhealthy dynamics within their relationships, they may, if they do get a bit out of control in the future, they may border on becoming abusive. And there's also this correlation or connection between experiencing, let's say, intimate partner violence in younger adulthood, and if you're remaining with that same partner throughout your human lifespan, that it can become what we would identify as elder abuse later on. So there's that spectrum of mistreatment and abuse that could occur. And so it's very important for us and our teams to identify what we would call the red flags. For example, how would you know when you're having a conversation with your client that there are things that you might need to flag and maybe go, maybe I should keep a note of this, and maybe I should come back to this again, or pay attention to it, or keep an eye on it in case it does become something a lot more than just an unhealthy tiff or an unhealthy experience. So, for example, valuing each other. How does valuing each other look like in a healthy relationship? Well, it's when you're valuing and honoring the independence and capabilities of this individual, when there's shared responsibilities, when power in that relationship is also shared, There's that commitment to value and honor and respect each person in this relationship. That's a healthy sign of a relationship when it comes to value. When does value become unhealthy, or how can we spot the value losing its health? Well, when the person is ignored in the relationship, when their say, their voice is not honored, it's not heard, it's ignored, or it's silenced in a way, or you give the person the silent treatment. When does value lose its abilities, or say it's when does value lose its value in an abusive relationship? When one becomes completely devalued, when one feels that they are being belittled and demeaned either verbally or behaviorally, when their opinion doesn't matter or is not heard, when they're being manipulated and controlled by the other person, it means that you have lost your value as a person in that relationship. I'll give you another one. How about disagreement? Disagreement in a healthy relationship looks like this. And I just also want to highlight that in any relationship, even healthy ones, minor disagreements are normal. We're not always going to see things the same way because we're unique individuals, right? And that's the beauty of diversity. However, when we disagree in a healthy relationship, we are respectful in our disagreements. We agree to disagree. We agree that we're not on the same page in ways that are respectful. We don't raise our voice. We don't manipulate. We don't use words that devalue, demean, and disrespect the person because we disagreed with them. We don't yell at them in an uncontrollable, scary way. And we try our best to put effort into working, either resolving the disagreement because we value and love and respect each other, or we agree that maybe this is not something we see eye to eye on. However, I still haven't lost your value in my eyes or my respect towards you. In an unhealthy relationship, a disagreement could lead to bickering, arguing. Sometimes it's small arguments, but it's persistent. Those nagging arguments that could really weigh on the person, makes them feel upset, makes them feel undervalued, or hurts them in a way because the other person is ignoring their opinion or their perspective in this point of view or situation. When does it become abusive? When you have no say, when there is actually no disagreement because you don't have an opportunity to voice your say, when the individual cannot make a decision for themselves, for the relationship, because they do not have the power in that relationship to make those decisions. So in an abusive relationship, there is one person who's controlling the relationship, who has power over the relationship. That power dynamic is so strong that maybe I can't voice my opinion because of that. Another thing that I probably wanted to highlight is that cultural nuances play a role in all of this as well. So I also urge you to keep in mind that in some cultures, individuals may not have a say in things because the hierarchy of their role or status in the family does not support that. So for example, in some cultures, your grandparents or your older family members or your older parents, for example, have a hierarchy of a role in that family in which their opinion, their statements are ones that the rest of the family abide by. And it's not that anybody else doesn't have an opinion, it's that the respect and honoring of the hierarchy of this person is important enough for them to all agree that this is the person who has the wisdom, the knowledge, the hierarchy in the family to be able to make that decision on behalf of the entire family. So I really want to make sure that you also know that this could be the case in some experiences, and just to keep that in mind as well sometimes. How about if you can share with me one, for example, how about responsibility? How would responsibility look like in a healthy relationship? This is my opportunity to take a sip of water. If anyone could share in the chat, or feel free, please, to take the mic. In a healthy relationship, how does responsibility look like? Stephanie, if you could read out if there are any comments, please let me know.
Yeah, people are just taking their moment here. Oh, there we go. So communicating around what needs to be completed around the house or with the kids.
That's a great one. That's a really good one.
Not assuming one person will just take care of it all.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So how would it, in an unhealthy relationship, how would responsibility look like? I guess the opposite of that healthy
The
component.
weaponized incompetence.
Yeah. How about in an abusive relationship? How does responsibility look like?
For the previous question, there was one person shouldering all of it.
Yeah.
And then for the second question, getting mad when it's not done.
Yeah, absolutely. So responsibility in a healthy relationship looks exactly what was mentioned. It's a shared responsibility. It's not one person has the role to do all of those things. Now, erring on the side of caution, because in some cultures, the dynamics of these cultures and the dynamics of some of these families is that in a heterosexual relationship, the woman looks after the needs of the household, the needs of the family. For example, the cooking and the cleaning and looking after the children. Whereas the male or the man is the provider, the financial provider. So in some cultures, these responsibilities, though from a Western lens might not make sense entirely, makes sense to some of these cultures and it works for them. And so I really want us to always, like I said, err on the side of caution when it comes to, are we looking at these signs from our Western lens and what we expect these cultures to, or these communities or families to, how they navigate and their dynamics look like from our Western lens? Or are we actually understanding how it seems to them, for them, and has it worked for them, right? So I just really want to highlight this. So even when we talk about shared responsibilities, that it's not just one person's responsibility than the other, sometimes it works for families. So I wouldn't say that that's unhealthy. I would, though, be more concerned, for example, if that one person who's doing that one thing, their health and well-being is being negatively impacted by that responsibility that they are carrying, that's when I would be concerned. So that's maybe something that we can keep in mind. When you look at some of these dynamics in these families, if it works for them, it works for them. But when it is affecting their health and their well-being, that's when that's when I would be worried. So even though we say, let's say from that Western lens, shared responsibilities is important, and that's when we know it's a healthy relationship. And from a Western lens again, and an unhealthy relationship is when there's an imbalance in those shared responsibilities. I would add when there is struggle in these shared responsibilities, when the person's health is declining as a result of these responsibilities. That's when I would say this is unhealthy. When it comes to abusive, it's when there is entirely this, as I mentioned, unbalanced responsibility aspect. And there's also no authority in making decisions. Let's say the individual doesn't want to not work, and the individual does want to go out and be in the workforce, or they don't want to be at home, or whatever it is. When there's an imbalance in being able to make decisions about my choices, and the person is voicing that concern, yet it's still being unheard, it's still not heard or respected or valued, that's when I say we are gradually going closer to being more abusive than not in that sense. And so that's something that I just really wanted to highlight and keep in mind. Let's try another one very
We
quickly.
have a question before you jump into the next one.
Yeah, yeah.
How can we help these cultures and how can we support?
In what sense? Like in a sense of how we see the dynamics?
Sorry, is it
Yeah,
easier if I
go ahead.
speak?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. My previous contract was working with a lot of newcomers to Canada.
Yeah.
So we became pretty adept at noticing who was in a healthy marriage or relationship and who was seeking other
Yeah.
opportunities in Canada. And because some of these people are so secluded, they come here with no family, no support, a little support, but oftentimes we would talk after work and say, how can we, knowing that there's things going on in the home, that would not be considered healthy by any stretch of the imagination, with children involved as well. And knowing that their way of life is so radically different and their culture is so radically different, it kind of sometimes felt like walking on eggshells. How do we help? How do we support? If where do we send them to? And oftentimes language is a barrier as well.
I mean, that is a really great question, and the concern is really there. Unfortunately, we don't really have that many ethnocultural resources and supports right now available. They're progressively growing, I have to say that, but that we're still missing a lot of communities that could benefit from some of these resources and support because of either that lack of compatibility with resources or the language barrier, for example. So I hear what you're saying. I think sometimes what I would request, I guess, in those instances is to have a conversation with these individuals to say, what is it that works for you right now? Or what can we provide for you right now? It might not be immediate assistance as such, but it might be gradual assistance. And I know that every organization is working with the means and the resources that they have. And so I usually would ask, so what is it that you're looking for and what can we provide you with, and what resources do we have now that we can use and that can help and assist in some way, in some form. It could be, for example, connecting the individual to social connections and social support groups outside of the home, where they can at least go out in the community and socialize or learn a skill or learn a language. Some of these individuals, you probably have worked with them, who come from lower educational backgrounds and also have no employment experiences as well. So
Yeah.
how are you going to support them to be able to thrive if they were to, let's say, live on their own or as single parents or single individuals? So maybe ways to enhance skills and build on skills. And those could be some gradual methods of supporting them. And then really, sometimes it's just reaching out and either reaching out to the community or reaching out to other agencies that might have the resources. I would sometimes just mention, and I attended the Diverse Voices conference a few weeks ago in Edmonton, and I attended this presentation that was really insightful, and it reminded me that sometimes when you're looking at some cultural communities, if a particular cultural community has a belief that they strongly hold, sometimes even doing outreach within that community might not be beneficial for that individual that you're trying to support. So, for example, if you're helping an individual leave an abusive relationship or an abusive marriage, and you're seeking the support of their community leader or their religious or spiritual leader who believes that women's role should be in the family and not break the family, you're not getting that right support. Does that make sense? And so sometimes even doing outreach within the community might not be helpful, depending on what the situation is. So it's really doing outreach outside of that community that might be the best method of action sometimes. And also understanding sometimes that, again, ways of supporting to us might be different to ways that they would want that support. And so not to overpromise and underdeliver, I think, is also important. And I'm sure that you're also very aware of that. Really just being honest and transparent with the means that you have and the resources that you have that could help this individual. And also doing check-ins and ensuring that the person knows we might not be able to help you immensely right now, but you're not alone, and we're not going to leave you to feel that you're alone in this. We'll try and do check-ins or try and do continuous reaching out to the individual and bringing them into the larger community to still feel connected.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I know sometimes, you know, we're all in a situation at one point in our career in which we really want to help an individual or a family or a community, and we're just tied. Our hands are tied with the limitation of resources and the other barriers like culture and language, etc. And so I hope that you know that you're doing your best, and we're all trying to do our best. But I think reaching out to organizations that could also have or share their resources might be very helpful. We might not have the means, but I'm sure our other agencies around us that we collaborate with might have those means to help us out.
Yeah, teamwork is very definitely a needed thing when it comes to helping anybody. I just feel like the more folks involved and the more brains involved, will end up wrapping around and assisting the person the best that they
Absolutely.
can.
So if there's any specific, let's say, and I've connected with so many people throughout this journey of mine. If there's anything in particular that you are stuck with in terms of a resource or a support or just maybe a connection, please feel free to reach out to me. And I
Thank
will
you.
look through my Rolodex of individuals that I've come across who are all amazing people with great intentions and great capabilities and resources. And if I can't help you, hopefully they can. If they can't help you, hopefully they know somebody who will. And somebody will know somebody who has a particular resource that could be helpful for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You. Another picture that I wanted to share of myself and a gathering of communities. And so I really love having these photos and then having them shared with me, because I think it exemplifies how ethnocultural communities are excited and they are invested in their well-being in some way, in some form, as long as we come with that sense of cultural compassion and humility and that sensitive way of approaching some of these topics. This is a gathering of ethnocultural community members from a Muslim background in Calgary, where we met this summer at Edworthy Park. And we were talking actually about mental health and well-being, but we were really talking about mental illness and the stigma associated with mental illness. But we were talking about it from that holistic mental health and well-being, and how can we promote our health and well-being from that mental and emotional component as we grow older. And you can see it was a great gathering. They loved being there. They appreciated the knowledge. They shared stories and experiences, and they made comments, and they teased some of the younger people who were there helping them out as well. It was a really great intergenerational conversation and opportunity. So when they feel that their voices are heard within a space, they will come, they will share their voices, and they will share their thoughts about what's working and what might not be working and what supports they would like to see. Healthy relationships as we grow older is vital because it actually acts as a buffer. So researchers have come out to say that having a healthy relationship throughout our human lifespan, but in particular as we grow older, is important for our mental well-being, our physical well-being. It actually prevents older adults from feeling isolated, which could put them at risk of being mistreated or abused as well. So forming healthy relationships is a buffer to all those challenges that could actually prevent them from experiencing a healthy aging experience. And these, of course, vulnerabilities were exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so it's highlighted in terms of the importance of being socially connected and the importance of social connections, especially for older adults who might feel a bit more excluded and disconnected from society, not only because of their physical conditions, but also because of family and the dynamics changing and evolving as they grow older. Another picture that I wanted to share with you. This is a photo I took consent from my mother and her friends. So this is a photo of me visiting my mum and her friends in New Zealand this summer as well. This is an example of a community of women in particular who gather together almost every weekend to check on each other, to support one another. Two of these individuals actually were dealing with stage 3 and stage 4 cancer. And unfortunately, one of these individuals actually passed away this year as a result of her cancer fight. The importance of this community gathering and these groups is exemplified in how they gathered together around one of these women who passed away's children, her daughters, and the husband who was left behind. It's just amazing to see those strengths and those resources being used and utilized from within that community, but it also exemplifies what healthy relationships look like. So my question that I would ask our community, and I'd like to ask you as well, if you feel comfortable sharing that in the chat, what does a healthy relationship look like to you? So hopefully as you're thinking about this and maybe writing your comment, a healthy relationship has a few things in common. It's a relationship that hopefully is meaningful, fulfilling, exciting. It's one where you feel that you trust an individual. There's mutual trust. There's also mutual support and mutual respect. Those are just some of the components. And I know I can see some comments. Stephanie, would you like to share some of those comments?
Yes, they're being sent in a creative manner here,
Yeah.
but as one letter at a time. But we have love one.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the full sentence, love one.
Yeah.
Or if you're still missing a word.
And so healthy relationships, I ask this question to ethnocultural communities because again, I don't want to come in with my lens and how I think healthy relationships look like. And I hope that we all keep that in mind. What a healthy relationship looks like to me will be different from anybody here in this, but there are commonalities. We want mutual respect. We want mutual honoring of who we are and our journeys and our experiences as well. We want to feel supported, however that looks like. We want to feel safe. And so healthy relationships do have a lot of commonalities, regardless of your cultural and linguistic backgrounds. But I would never assume or throw my own lens on healthy relationships on a community before I hear and respect and honor theirs. And so that's where I'd start. How do healthy relationships look like to you? How do you know a relationship is healthy in your community? Can you share with me what are the signs and what can tell you a healthy relationship is, or when it is or isn't a healthy relationship? So healthy relationships are built on, and these are commonalities, by the way. So according to researchers, it does not matter where you are from or what language you come from. Respect and care. Healthy relationships are characterized by mutual respect and kindness and care. Family dynamics are important. It doesn't matter if you're from a Western family dynamic or environment or a non-Western one. Sometimes family dynamics actually are valued and important regardless of your cultural background. Positive relationships with your children, grandchildren, and community members are important, and they do contribute to our overall health and well-being. When we feel good about our relationships, it's not just that feeling, we also feel physically good as well. So there's a connection between our emotions and our thoughts and our behaviors, right? Healthy relationships are also built on communication and understanding. Again, unified. It doesn't matter where you're from, what background you're from. Communication is important. Being able to express and feel safe in expressing is important. Incorporating some of these cultural practices, understanding dynamics is important. How families communicating ethnocultural communities communicate could look different, however. In some communities, maybe eye contact is not the same as we would perceive it in Western communities. Respecting a person, when an older adult, when they're talking, and lowering your gaze is actually a respectful way of communication or nonverbal communication in some cultures. And so keeping in mind, there are some cultural nuances sometimes that are at play when it comes to communication and respect and communication in some ethnocultural communities, and that's how they are in those communities and cultures. Healthy relationships are also built on interdependence and support. We support each other. We rely on each other. I think those are very important and valued factors in healthy relationships. Family engagement is actually important. You'll probably notice if you're working with ethnocultural communities, family is usually in the midst of this conversation with you. It's not just about the client or the older adult, it's about the family. And sometimes the older adult might not want to voice their opinion or make a decision without consulting their family members. And that's not to say that that client doesn't have the competency or the ability to make those decisions. It's that culturally they are respecting the family, the role of family and family dynamics. Even if they have made their decision, it's just important to voice it, excuse me, with the larger family gathering and group before voicing their own decisions out. So that's just something that I really wanted to highlight too. Excuse me. So this is just a spectrum of relationships. All relationships are on a spectrum, or they can be at least on a spectrum. So relationships exist on a spectrum ranging from healthy to abusive, and unhealthy relationships being in the middle in some way, in some form. When I talk about elder abuse, I talk about unhealthy relationships, because abuse in itself carries a different meaning in some ethnocultures. And it's not only stigmatized, but it also can mean physical abuse as well, rather than emotional, psychological, or financial, or the other forms of abuse. So again, my question to some communities is, when you are in an unhealthy relationship, or if you have a friend of yours who's sharing with you that they are experiencing an unhealthy relationship or unhealthy dynamics in the family, what words do they use? What do they share with you? What do they tell you? How do they express that this is an unhealthy relationship? And then it's up to us to then be able to pick on those words and pick those words and use them in our dialogue and conversation with those communities. Behaviors can look different for different people. What is healthy for one from our cultural lens might look unhealthy or abusive in another. What we perceive as abuse might not be perceived as abuse in some cultures. And so it's very important to honor and respect some of those nuances and try to understand the context and the bigger picture sometimes. Unhealthy relationships are characterized by disrespect and distrust. Abusive relationships usually involve destructive behaviors like physical or emotional, for example, abuse, in which people exert and can use control and power over the other partner. And that's where you might find that it's becoming a lot more dangerous than just what we would refer to as an unhealthy relationship. I really wanted to highlight here the power and the influence of culture. So healthy relationships, as you probably see here, they uphold this inherent worth of individuals, and they emphasize mutual respect and honoring and autonomy of older adults. And so in ethnocultural communities, these are this on my left-hand side, this is the characteristics regardless of the ethnic background. We all want to be respected and live with dignity. We all want mutual interdependence and relying on each other and that mutual reciprocal support. And we all want that reciprocal care and that feeling of being valued. In collectivist cultures, being a culture that honors and values hierarchy. Family dynamics need to be always, most cases, at the forefront of the conversation sometimes. Intergenerational and multi-generational household living situations might exist. Filial piety, which is that sense of familial responsibility. Your parents raised you, and when your parents are older, then you take care of them. And patriarchal values. So those could be nuances that are at play sometimes in ethnocultural communities. They are the cultural influences that influence the characteristics of healthy relationships. So the cultural influences like collectivism, intergenerational solidarity, etc., they're the ones that could influence how healthy relationships or unhealthy relationships look like. So in collectivist cultures, for example, the well-being of the group is prioritized. Family and keeping family close-knit and honoring family is important. Taking care of older adults and intergenerational, multi-generational households are important. Grandparents take care of grandchildren. That is their role in some cultures as well, and that is valued. That might be taken sometimes a little bit more to the extreme, where some older adults would report that they feel like they're free babysitters all the time. And that's where I'd be a bit more concerned about the well-being of the individual. And filial piety, as I mentioned, so it's rooted in many ethnocultural communities, and this emphasis of caring for older parents is actually a moral duty and a moral responsibility of individuals. And so those are the things that we can see sometimes playing in the dynamics of healthy, and they're still considered healthy, by the way. So even though they might not seem from our Western lens healthy, if it works for them and it's not impacting their well-being, it's not taking away and depriving them from their independence and their competency and their well-being and financial well-being and abilities, it is not necessarily going to be a matter of concern. What does matter, I think, in some of these communities is, or how we serve them, is that we highlight their strengths. And like I said, looking at these communities from a strength-based is important. So these are actually some protective factors that you'll find in ethnocultural communities that would promote healthy relationships. Having emotional support as a community is very important. You find that in ethnocultural communities, if they are experiencing a challenge, they usually go to their informal supports first, which could be an older adult family member in the family or the tribe, or it could be their community, religious or spiritual leader within the community. So they usually reach out to informal supports before they reach out to our formal agencies, which are our formal supports and services. So having that strength-based approach actually means that we look at the strengths that these communities come with and how we can promote those strengths for sustainable growth. And so these protective factors that these communities come from, including emotional support, where they offer support to one another, is also cultural continuity. So a strength is, in fact, promoting some of these values, promoting language, promoting that sense of ethnic identity. I wouldn't see that as something that is something we need to be concerned of or strip away from. Resilience, again, is also a key component to coping. We're not born with resilience, we acquire it, we gain it, we grow from our challenges, and that's how we become more resilient and better able to adapt and cope. Research has come out looking at resilient older adults and their coping mechanisms and preventing them from being exploited or mistreated or abused. Older adults who have coping mechanisms and are identified as resilient older adults are far more likely to prevent themselves from experiencing abuse or stopping the abuse or reporting it or seeking out support. So being resilient is actually a superpower and a strength. And then at the end of the day, these communities value that their community connection, because that sense of involvement, that connection with their spiritual a spiritual base, or that faith-based connection that they have, actually does promote their well-being as well. And culture can be a protective factor from experiencing protecting them from experiencing abuse. But culture can also be a risk factor, in which if you come from a culture that values and honors older adults, and if abuse is happening in those environments or communities, they are less likely to probably report it, because they don't want a negative spotlight put on to those communities, just in case. And so culture is both protective and a risk factor. This is another question that I ask my ethnocultural community members who attend some of these presentations of mine on healthy and unhealthy relationships is, can you think of a relationship in your life that has positively impacted your well-being and your health as you've grown older? My aim here in this conversation is to help community members think about their coping mechanisms, think about their superpowers and their strengths, think about the resources that they have. Sometimes, especially when you're a newcomer, a new language, a new culture, a new climate, new environment, confusing systems, recognizing and realizing and acknowledging your strengths could be put on the back burner. And so sometimes it's up to us to gently nudge them and remind them that you do have strengths, that you do have capabilities, that you do have internal and inner resources and coping mechanisms. And maybe we can tease that out gently to help you use those tools of yours, and to help us know of how we can support you and enhance those tools in order for you to thrive and live a healthy aging experience. So I've talked about this and about positive relationships, and just for the sake of time, because again, as you probably know, we've run out of time, I just wanted to kind of highlight, when our relationships are healthy, we do feel healthy overall. It can affect our physical health, our well-being, and we've figured that out. So what does an unhealthy relationship look like? And I would ask that would be a question that I ask community members. What does an unhealthy relationship look like to you? I want them to share those thoughts and those feelings and those conversations with me. And I wanted to highlight in those conversations is, as we grow older, our relationships might change. And they might change not because of, and there's no excuse for abuse. It's never your fault, but it could be because of other factors like stress. When I work with older adults from ethnocultural communities who are experiencing abuse and mistreatment from their children, they usually will say things to me like, it's not my child's fault. It's because they are stressed. It's because they're unemployed. It's because they are financially at hardship. Or it could be because of undiagnosed mental illnesses. Help my child, support them, then they'll stop mistreating me or taking advantage of me. So you can see, even the conversation that you might have with older adults is that even though they're being mistreated, they don't want you to support them. They want you to support their families, or they want the support to happen to all family members involved in that situation of theirs. And so I think it's very important to kind of keep that in mind when it comes to unhealthy relationships. So this is the difference, and I've shared that with you. It's just a different way of sharing it. Now we have it recorded. You'll find that here in the recording as well. And I'll share again just another aspect of unhealthy relationships are those where the person is consistently takes control, belittles. This is what I would share with community members. This is the way that we have conversations about unhealthy relationships. No matter what or how they look like, they will affect the person negatively. And I'll say, it doesn't make you feel good when you're in a relationship that is unhealthy. How does that, how do the unhealthy relationships make you feel? How does it look like? what would you like in terms of support in that situation as well? And so they would talk about these things, about being disrespected, about experiencing neglect, about being controlled or financially exploited, and about this conflict in poor relationships. And you see, I've put in brackets older adults, but really, I really believe that this could be something that all communities, ethnocultural communities, could probably voice and experience. So this is research and evidence-based, that unhealthy relationships will look like disrespect, rejection, or ignoring, financial and emotional exploitation, conflict in the family, and or having that lack of emotional closeness to older adults, especially if caregivers are experiencing stress and burnout. So abuse in later life also happens, and I don't want to really rush this, but I just wanted to kind of highlight that the dynamics of abuse do change the trajectory of the conversation that you might have with some of these communities. It looks different to them than it looks to us. It usually is disrespect and neglect and not honoring of the individual, as opposed to sexual abuse, for example. You're less likely to hear ethnocultural communities talk about sexual abuse, but they will talk about disrespect and dishonoring of the older person. Abuse in later life does happen. Harassment and stalking can be included as a form of elder abuse, according to researchers, and they can co-occur in cases involving abuse in later life. So if a person is being financially abused, they're actually more likely also to be experiencing other forms of abuse as well, and not just that one form of abuse. I'm not going to go through this part here, but it does talk about intimate partner and family violence. You will get the slides, I promise you. I just wanted to kind of highlight it is important to create these respectful strategies to addressing mistreatment. It's important to build trust. It's important to have communication and conversations with our cultural communities. What works for you, include them and involve them in those solutions. And I think they're very important, and celebrating their strengths as well. So thank you so much for being here and listening. And I do apologize, as usual. I gave you a highlight that this is going to be something that we're going to experience over time. But if you wanted to reach out, please feel free to do so. I'm far more approachable, I guess, when I have my time all to myself. And so it's going to be one of those things where I really want to make sure that I give you as much information as I possibly can. But there's always a lot to share when it comes to these things. So an hour is never enough. But thank you so much for this. And I'll stop sharing